here and hand off to Irena.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Irena. I am a senior majoring in economics and international studies. I guess my journey starts with a panel that was organized by Beth of a bunch of Marshall scholars who talked about their experiences pursuing postgraduate study in the UK. I attended that as a freshman, I believe, and it seemed really interesting to me. And so immediately after that panel, I hopped on the Oxford website and a couple of other universities around the UK and like looked at master's degrees that I thought would be interesting. That was because like I knew I wanted to pursue postgrad because I like was fairly sure I wanted to work at the Department of State, and to do anything remotely substantive at state, you need to have at least a master's degree. And then last year, so spring quarter or so, I met with Jason Kelly Roberts from the fellowship office. And I told him that I was interested in doing a one-year Marshall. And he told me that people usually don't do one-year Marshalls unless they have like a commitment immediately after that year. So like you have been accepted to law school and are deferring, you've been accepted to medical school and are deferring, like you're going to do Teach for America or something like that. And so he was like, you should really look into the 2-year Marshall to see if there's any other like master's degrees that interest you, because the one that I was interested in, global governance and diplomacy, was only a year. And then he was also like, well, if you're going to apply for the 2-year Marshall, you might as well apply for the Rhodes, which would be the same thing, just only limited to Oxford. And since the degree that I was interested in was at Oxford anyway, he recommended I apply for that too. And then over the summer, I started really thinking about who would be writing my letters of recommendation and what I wanted my essays to be about. And so I like reached out to my recommenders in July-ish. I submitted my internal application in August, and I believe interviewed in August. And there was a little bit of back and forth between me and Beth in September to finalize both the Marshall and the Rhodes applications. And one was due end of September, the other early October. And then there was blissful silence for a little bit. And I was notified that I was a finalist for both, and Beth was really, really helpful in like prepping me. So we had a lot of mock interviews, I believe 2. The first one was like the people who had written me letters of recommendation, which was honestly the more intimidating of the 2, because the people that write for you are people that hopefully you really respect and admire. And so having them kind of like test you and probe at you is a little bit intimidating. And then that one was my easy one. And then my second mock interview was the hard one, where I got grilled and got asked really mean questions. But it all prepped me really well for my interviews, which were in November. And they were like almost back to back. I think they were the same week, actually. And yeah, and I don't know, I can talk a bit more about like the specifics of the interview itself, but I see a question in the chat. Can I answer it? Sure. Okay, so I guess what's mean, I ran for my local like school board my freshman year of college, and I lost. And so like I think the first question I was asked during my mean interview was like, why do you think you lost your school board race? Which is like a valid question. And I remember the other one I remember quite clearly is like I had been talking about like why it's important to like localize aid and to really work with the communities to which foreign aid are awarded in like planning and implementing projects. And one of the professors on that interview asked me, like, if you think it's so important to localize aid, like, why don't you go like work for the Peace Corps for 2 years instead of pursuing a master's degree at like the most elite out of touch institution you possibly could? So those were 2 of the examples of the mean questions. But yeah, passing it off to William, and I can answer any more specifics if anyone has them.
William, do we still have you?
Yeah, you still have me.
Okay, great.
I just wanted All right. So hello everyone. My name is William. I am a Ugandan student at the Northwestern Qatar campus. I study journalism and I am the recipient of the Rhodes Scholarship for East Africa and will be pursuing, hopefully, uh, master's and a DPhil in social data science later this year at the Oxford Internet Institute. My journey so far could say started from the day I joined Northwestern. I knew I wanted to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship, and I made it a priority to. I first got in touch with one of the old Rhodes, one of the last Ugandan Rhodes scholars from 2002, who I happened to like, I guess, bother on LinkedIn until they replied to me. So I emailed them and I just messaged them and they got back to me and we had a phone conversation on my I think it was my second day of college, and yeah, I don't think a lot of it helped, but it kind of just I just knew this is something I wanted to do, so I was kind of very intentional when it came to like pursuing lots of opportunities and making the most of what I had available here in Qatar. So I worked as a data scientist at Vice Arabia in Abu Dhabi. I've been a data scientist at the Qatar Computing Research Institute, where I work with their social computing team to look at different algorithms for detecting disasters in social media images. And essentially, I was a teaching assistant in multiple statistics classes, and I really stretched myself because a lot of the things I wanted to do weren't necessarily taught in the program, and I went out of my way to teach myself a lot of hard things. Uh, and I guess when it came to actually like applying, and I guess I've skipped a few things here and there, but when it came to actually doing the interviews, what I remember, even in the mock panel, was like, I guess I had a strong sense of purpose in like what I wanted to do and kind of where I was going. I was very sure about the program and I guess I tried to line this path through all my activities that showed that okay, clearly I had this interest. I was able to make the most of every opportunity that was presented, even like the things, even like being when COVID happened, I still managed to make things happen for me. And I guess like that scrappiness showed through in a lot of uh, the applications. So like in both my PhD proposal itself and my personal statement, and even during the interviews, both the mock interview I had with Beth and a bunch of people from Evanston who really grilled me and made me feel like I didn't know what I was doing. Uh, yeah, so by the time I got to the actual interview, it felt like I knew I just had to go in there and be myself and be 100% and kind of sell my vision for what I wanted to do with the scholarship if I got it, which was actually get involved with, a lot of startup culture back in Uganda, because also here in Doha, I've been lucky enough to have been involved with a bunch of startups and had a startup myself also, which was able to raise some money and work on multiple products. So I guess I really impressed them with impressed I guess the panels I was able to interview with my kind of scrappiness and clarity of thought. I was very consistent, and it just showed that I was a very hardworking and like what you call scrappy person. So I guess that's the end of my journey. You could say I actually this is like some insider information. I remember when I met the secretary from for East Africa when I went back home this December, and I did ask what it was that I guess stood out from like everyone else who was interviewing, and I remember he said something along the lines of me just being able to pitch a clear vision for what I wanted to do. I was very clear. I didn't try to pretend like I was someone else. I was just consistent, and I think they saw that. So like I guess the best advice I could give is just be yourself and pitch yourself. Pitch what you want to do. Like pitch your dream or anything it is. And you never know, they will hopefully buy it and be convinced. Yeah.
So, William, I would really appreciate, and I know that there are international students who will be watching this, and something that's very important to me is that international students realize that there are plenty of opportunities open to them. Too frequently, in my experience, international students think, oh, fellowships, they're from the US government, and they don't even, they don't come to our door. We have to be very explicit that there are awards that international students pursue and win and find great success in doing so, but the timelines and the procedures are different. And your timeline and procedures were very different from Irena. She gave a bit of insight into that, and I will, before this call ends, go through what the timeline for US applicants will be in the coming year. But I would be grateful for my own edification and for the students on the call if you could just talk about what the process was for East Africa in filing the application.
All right. So you were supposed to have submitted your application about, I think, August 31st. That's when you would send it in. And I can't remember when I had my interview. It was very late in the year. I think it was about November or December. It was either the end of November or the beginning of December, one of those two, when I had my interview. And it was online. And I think the reason it was even like pushed that far is because it was supposed to be in person, but because of some logistical concerns, because of, I guess, an Ebola outbreak that had happened and COVID restrictions, they decided to have it online. So I had the panel interview then, November, December, I guess. And my panel was mostly made up of other Rhodes scholars, uh, from both from East Africa and different parts, everywhere really. I think one of them worked with one of the people in the panel was working with the Rwandan government, one of the presidential advisors for President Paul Kagame. So yeah, it was a round of really intense questions about myself, about what I want to do with the program, everything. And I guess I heard back from them, I think the next day, like more or less.
So they're generally consistent because that's just the British way of doing things, that you interview and then you let people know immediately, as opposed to in the US where we frequently let people wait a painfully long time for news. But you each, I know a bit, but because Irena did have to be nominated by Northwestern and so forth, I'm more familiar with her sort of program search development, though I think it might be nice for the folks to hear it here. But William, I'd love to know a little bit more about how you identified your program in Oxford, whether you were talking to your faculty mentors in Doha about that, whether you were getting that information from friends, sort of how you decided that you wanted to pursue a British DPhil rather than a master's degree or a US PhD or some, any number of other options, and then made that argument in your, your course proposal for the Rhodes.
All right. I guess when it came to picking the program, I knew I wanted to do something in tech. And I had heard of the Oxford Internet Institute through one of my professors previously, and I just looked at the different programs they had available. And I think the reason I chose my particular program was it was combined. It was both the master's and DPhil. So you would get into both at the same time, and you would do your master's, and then you'd continue with your DPhil. So most of the work you do in your master's would feed into whatever it is you proposed for your DPhil. And it was unique because it was a data science program, except it focused a lot on answering social research questions, and that is something that I guess like fit well within my background as a journalist. So I and also having worked as a social data scientist already, I kind of had like an eye on this particular program just because it's one of the few that places such emphasis on social science research. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to like discovering this particular program that I applied for.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. And then Irena, do you mind giving you mentioned it a bit, but a slightly more detailed sort of how you thought about identifying programs and which ones actually appealed to you?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess like I always start this answer in high school. So I still am involved with a charity that works with girls from Benin and Niger. And we're specifically focused on women's education. So we host leadership conferences and also like fund tuition for girls who are the first in their family to attend high school. I had taught the entrepreneurship workshops at the leadership conferences for the organization. And so like that's how I knew I wanted to study economics and international studies. Like that was kind of like the space I was already occupying in high school. And then I took foreign aid and US foreign policy my freshman year with Ambassador Kelly. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. I want to work for the Department of State. And so global governance and diplomacy seemed like a really good fit. After Jason was like, hey, you should look at a second master's, I literally sat down with like the catalog of master's degrees at Oxford. And I was like, what else would be interesting? And I pretty quickly happened upon economics for development because that was E. So it was they're alphabetically organized. And I was like, I love development. I had taken development economics classes at Northwestern. And so it just seemed like a really good fit. And that's what I applied with. And I wrote my academic statement about those two programs. And surprisingly, that's actually not what I ended up applying to as my first choice. So fun fact, after you win the Rhodes, you still have to apply to Oxford. So I did end up applying to global governance and diplomacy as my second choice, backup. And then I ended up applying for the MPhil in international relations. And between winning the Rhodes and applying to Oxford, I thought a lot about what I want, what skills I wanted to pick up in my master's, and what my interests were specifically in diplomacy and the international system. And so the skills I really wanted to pick up was how do I collect my own information and come to my own opinion. Foreign policy circles are very often accused of groupthink. And so I was like, this will serve me well if I learn how to search for data and figure out what I think about it. And that's what, the MPhil with the opportunity to write a thesis allows you to do. And it's also just endlessly customizable. So I'm pretty interested in international economics, and also Russia. So I ended up applying for the master's, and describing a potential thesis as looking at Russian economic statecraft. And the third thing that I just liked about it is you can turn it into a DPhil pretty easily, which you can't really do with the taught 1-year master's unless you apply to a program like William did.
Thank you. So I just want to talk a little bit about that difference between what the process was for William and the process is for Irena, which is in common with the Marshall process, or if any of you end up thinking about the Mitchell Scholarship to Ireland, for example, or if we've got scientists on the call. If you're a US scientist, there's a program called the Churchill that goes to Cambridge. Those programs all require an institutional endorsement. And so that means that my job is to bring together representatives of Northwestern to interview all the students who would like to interview Northwestern, to represent Northwestern in these national competitions, and choose which of those we are going to endorse and put forward at the national level and write institutional letters of endorsement and offer advising. Now, there's a critical distinction about the Rhodes Scholarship. For anyone who gets university endorsement, not only does the candidate have to sign off saying that no one has helped them with their personal statement, but I, on behalf of the university, have to say that sign off saying that no one has helped them with their personal statement. And that is generally common across the Rhodes constituencies. However, what I can gladly help any Rhodes applicant with, whether they are an endorsed US candidate or someone who is applying from another country, is I can help with the Rhodes resume. I am very happy to help you think about how to assemble an effective letter packet, because we didn't talk a lot about how many letters. William didn't mention how many he needed. In the US, you need 8. There are some regions that have 6, and some that even have 4 or 5, because every Rhodes constituency is getting to set some of their own parameters. But my mantra about letters of recommendation is it doesn't matter whether they want 1 letter or 8. You want the letter packet to demonstrate the depth of your commitment to what you're proposing, the breadth of your interest and experience, and how you have evolved over time to have this focus. And that is something that I am, not only Jason, every other member of this team is very happy to work with candidates on. And it's actually, to my mind, one of the most valuable things you can do regardless of the outcome. I mean, we have 2 people on this call who were fortunate and secured the funding. I can say, having done this for many years, the thing that I take greatest personal satisfaction in is that even the people who do not end up walking away with the scholarship routinely reply in our feedback that they found that process of thinking through their letters and thinking through why exactly they wanted to study what they wanted to study of value. And that's what I can always tell students as to why it's worthwhile. If you look at the statistics, it's daunting indeed, but we have made great efforts in this office to ensure that anyone who considers this and makes the effort to go through the process is going to leave it with a good outcome in terms of their capacity to think about what they're going to do in the future, and their sense of confidence in having mentors, not just in our office, but more broadly, who have their backs and are good conversation partners as their careers evolve. So in a moment, I am going to stop recording so that folks feel more comfortable asking questions, but I am going to paste into the chat the document that gives the dates for this year, because they have moved up the deadlines substantially in the last couple of years. And in fact, Irena, you didn't interview until September 6th this year. And the declaration deadline for the US wasn't until August 15th. But this year, we're going to ask folks to declare, and by declare, that's have contacted your letter writers, which it is not a fluke, in my opinion, that Irena did so in July and was successful. Too frequently, students leave it until the very end. And that's not the best situation. You want to have the conversation with those letter writers starting early. It's why I'm sitting here on, Shrove Tuesday, encouraging folks to talk about this and taking this recording so that we can share it with folks early in the year. So by August 1st, you should have spoken to your letter writers. They don't have to have written anything. You'll probably be like William and Irena and off doing fabulous things this summer between your junior and senior year, and that will impact how you write your essays. But you have to make the commitment by August 1st. Here are the folks who I've spoken to who are going to supply letters of reference, and these are the programs to which I intend to apply. Again, you don't have to have written the essays yet, but I need to know that you're serious and that you have started to align your ducks, to use that metaphor, so that when you do have to submit, and that's moved up to August 29th so that we can interview you. So we can interview even earlier in September and have time to turn things around. So that's when you get this British packet. Not all of you are, some of you are like Irena and you're attending this years in advance, and that's great. That's what I did before I won my Marshall. I attended as a sophomore and thought this is the coolest thing ever. And Irena did it even a year ahead of me and thought it was the coolest thing ever. So I'm glad you're here, but I'm going to supply the packet in the chat just so that you can get a sense of what it is. It's also going to be on our website. Last year's is still there. I need to put the new one, which is quite, well, we don't use presses anymore. If we still used a press, it would be literally hot off the press, but so that you all have that first idea of how it works. And there are some tips in there about how you can think about essays, because my strongest advice for coming out the other end, as William said, sounding authentic, being, more importantly, authentic and focused as these two were, is to assemble, your library of anecdotes from the different parts of your life and identify for yourself what those through lines are so that your essays reflect it. And when you're interviewed, you can draw on them to convey the way in which you bring that focus and that commitment to everything you do. So with that, I'm going to stop recording, and please come on in and ask questions of our two guests.